Welcome to Focus Washington. I'm Chuck Conconi. I'm here today with Steve Miranda, the Chief Human Resources Strategic Planning and Diversity Officer with the Society of Human Resource Management, a global human resource membership society with over 250,000 members. And Steve is here to speak with us about effective team management. Steve, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Chuck. Happy to be here.
You know, I've spent a lot of time, not that I know anything about managing anything, but you often hear that the problem in almost any corporation or any place is that people don't know how to manage well. Is that what you hear in your organization?
Well, it's certainly a challenge, not just in United States corporations, but global organizations all around the world. The ability to go ahead and find a focus area, assemble a team against that focus area, and to lead that team is very, very difficult.
Well, your organization advises people. What kind of advice do you give them about how to best manage?
Well, the advice can come in many different areas. If we're talking about smaller organizations, it could be along the lines of making sure that you're sourcing your talent appropriately, making sure that you're assembling a diverse skill set, but then also understanding how those diverse skill sets work together. The critical issue in whatever organization you're pulling together is helping those people understand what's the best way in which we work together.
Well, what are some of the things you tell me? In a recent talk, I heard you say there's an optimum size to teams.
Yes, a lot of the research that you look at today will indicate that the optimal size for a team is somewhere between 7 to 12 people. Fewer than 7 people, it's not necessarily large enough to be effective across the organizations. More than 12 people, you have what's known as an organizational problem, where you literally end up spend more time managing the dynamics of the team than really managing the efficiency of the team. So there's some science behind those numbers.
Well, what is some of the efficiency ways of doing it? I mean, I always think about management and wish I knew more about it, but it confuses me as to when you're working with people, how do you get the idea is how to get the best out of them, right? The most efficiency?
Absolutely. So I would give 3 pieces of advice. Well, the first thing I would say is you have to listen. And what I mean by listen is not giving the generic nod to say, yes, I'm seeking your input, but to really listen aggressively for what the people have to tell you, and then not to be afraid to understand the consequences of what they're telling you. The second is, after you've listened to everybody, you have to analyze. You have to take all the diverse inputs and then understand which ones are you going to incorporate more, which ones are you going to incorporate less, how will you come to a decision. And third, you have to decide and declare that. If you have a team that understands that their 3 roles are to listen, analyze, and then decide, you have a very effective organization.
I have a friend who's a former ambassador, and he said it was difficult for him to get the right kind of advice. There were 2 things were either wrong. He says either they loved you so much they didn't want to give you bad news, or they just didn't want to give you bad news because they were afraid of you. Is that a common kind of problem? It
is a very common type of problem, and the thing I've observed is that the individuals who state that they don't often get the bad news, it's really reflective upon their own personality. If you invite commentary and if you invite dialogue in a way in which the other individual feels that it's absolutely appropriate and safe, that's the critical word, and safe to provide you information and input that's counter to what everyone else is saying, you create a very, very dynamic team. It's literally like having a trusted person in the crow's nest of a ship who's willing to shout down to the captain that there is an iceberg ahead. But if he or she is going to get his head bitten off when he or she shouts down to the captain, the opportunity is going to be far less.
But even the problem of loving you too much, that's a different one.
That's right. Stephen Covey has a very famous phrase around this. He says, we cannot imagine how much harm we do to people when we do not give them effective and honest feedback. The best coaches in the world, the best bosses that I've ever had, were the ones that were able to tell me quite blankly when what I was doing was not being effective, but were able to do it in a manner which I knew was caring and was aimed at my future development.
Now, how does your organization help people in managing things? I mean, what do you do? I know that's a big question, but to simplify it for me.
Sure. Well, Chuck, at a high level, SHRM is the world's largest HR association. We have 250,000 members. We exist in more than 140 countries, and we have offices in both Beijing, China, and in Mumbai, India. What we do is we basically help organizations find ways to unleash human capital, whether it be in terms of training individuals around fundamentals, compensation benefits, team leadership, organizational effectiveness, all the way to higher order human capital functions such as organizational design, organizational development. So if you put it in a real simple nutshell, what SHRM helps to do is make people invaluable.
One thing, probably we have time for one last question. One thing that interests me is you said there's no universality about the advice. I mean, if you're someone from India or you're someone from the United States, it's very different in the way you react and the way you manage.
Absolutely true, and I think one of the biggest things that any manager who now takes on global management responsibility has to understand is that answers to very simple questions take on very different answers in different countries. Americans have a very famous phrase, which is, we need to do the right thing. Well, what we find is, as we deal with different cultures, what looks like the right thing in the Middle East versus Asia versus Latin America versus the United States, it's very different. Managers have to become globally savvy in the nuances of cultural differences.
Steve, this has been fun, and we've run out of time. Thank you so much. It's been Steve Miranda. I'm Chuck Conconi, and this has been Focus Washington.